In September 1944, three American military policemen walked into an English pub and ordered three black soldiers to leave. A British sergeant put down his pint. Then he asked one question. Under whose law? The Americans had white helmets, batons, written orders, and the full weight of their army behind them. The British soldiers had no order at all. They had a table, they had wounded men, they had three guests who had done nothing wrong. And in that crowded room, that was enough. The pub was called the Bell and Lantern, a low-ceilinged place outside Andover, not far from the camps and roads that fed the war. Outside, the blackout curtains were up. Inside, the room was wet wool, pipe smoke, warm beer, and the tired laughter of men who had been frightened too long to sit quietly with their own thoughts. Sergeant William Harker was there on convalescent leave from Normandy. He had a burn along one wrist, a bandage under his tunic, and a ringing in his right ear that made loud rooms sound like the bottom of a steel drum. He belonged to an infantry battalion that had gone into France in June and come back in pieces. Not all of it. Not enough of it. At his table were four British soldiers. One had a cane. One had a letter from home he kept folding and unfolding without reading. One had not said much since Caen, and one was drunk in the deliberate, disciplined way of a man trying not to remember the sound of a mortar landing behind him. At the table beside them sat three black American soldiers from a Quartermaster truck company. Corporal Elijah Mercer from Mississippi, Private Leonard Brooks from Alabama, Technician 5th grade Samuel Tate from North Carolina. They had been in Britain for months, running convoys between ports, depots, railheads, fuel dumps, and airfields. It was not the kind of work that got painted onto recruitment posters. No cavalry charge, no flag raising. Just petrol tins, brake dust, cold food. 16-hour drives on roads with no headlights. And the knowledge that if their trucks stopped moving, somebody else's tank stopped moving too. The conversation between the tables had started cautiously. That was how soldiers began with strangers. A nod, a raised glass, a joke about British beer being warm enough to shave in, then an argument about cigarettes, then a round shared across the gap, then another. By 10 o'clock, the gap between the tables had stopped being a gap. Mercer was telling Harker that American coffee could take paint off a lorry door. Harker told him English tea had carried the empire by being too bitter to surrender. Brooks laughed so hard he had to put his forehead in his hand. For a little while, it was only a pub. Not an army, not a color line, not a regulation. Just men who understood roads, noise, fear, and the strange mercy of a room where nobody was asking them to be brave. Then the door opened. Three American MPs stepped in. White helmets, polished belts, cold eyes moving from table to table. The lead man saw the three black soldiers before he saw anyone else. Harker saw it happen. He saw the room separate in the man's mind. White soldiers, British soldiers, civilians, and then those three. Not guests, not comrades. A problem. By late 1944, well over 100,000 black American troops had passed through or served in Britain. Many were pushed into the work the Army needed most and praised least. They drove fuel, they unloaded ships, they laid pipeline, they stacked ammunition, they hauled rations, tires, spare parts, and every heavy thing an advancing army pretends moves by itself. When the Red Ball Express began racing supplies across France, black drivers carried a huge share of that burden. At its height, that system moved thousands upon thousands of tons a day. Without it, the advance slowed. Without the advance, men died. But the United States Army was still segregated. Jim Crow came over on the ships with the rifles, the trucks, and the ration crates. It arrived in orders, in separate billets, in military police patrols, and in quiet pressure placed on British pubs to cooperate with a system Britain had not written but was being asked to host. Some landlords gave in. Some towns learned which nights the MPs came through. Some black soldiers were told which doors they could enter and which rooms they should avoid. American command called it discipline. British commanders often called it an internal American matter. The men in the helmets called it simple. That night, in the Bell and Lantern, they expected it to be simple, too. The lead MP pointed at Mercer, Brooks, and Tate. "You three, outside." The laughter died. Mercer did not move. Brooks looked down at the table. Tate kept one hand around his glass, not drinking, just holding it like it might give him somewhere to put his anger. Harker looked at the MP. "What have they done?" The American turned toward him. The British battle dress registered. The sergeant's stripes registered. The bandaged wrist registered last. "This is U.S. Army business." "They're sitting in an English pub," Harker said. "So I'm asking again, what have they done?" "They are restricted personnel." "Restricted from what?" "From drinking with white troops." Harker heard the words. He looked at Mercer, and in that second he saw something that stayed with him longer than the wound in his wrist. Not surprise, not fear, something worse. Recognition. The look of a man who already knew how the room was supposed to end. The look of a man waiting for strangers to prove that they were no different from all the others. Harker stood, not quickly, not theatrically. He just rose from the chair, one hand on the table, the way a tired soldier stands when he has decided the next minute belongs to him. "These men are drinking with us," he said. The MP's face hardened. "You need to sit down, Sergeant." "I will," Harker said, "when you tell me the charge." "There is no charge. There is an order." "Then your order is short of a crime." One of the British soldiers at Harker's table stood too. Then the one with the cane. Then the quiet one from Caen. Then two artillerymen from the bar who had heard enough to understand the shape of it. The landlord came out from the back room wiping his hands on a towel. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a speech. He looked at the MPs and said, "Not in here." The lead MP took one step forward. The room moved without moving. Shoulders squared, chairs shifted, a glass touched down too hard. No one swung a fist. No one needed to. The American had 3 men. The pub had a room. For a moment, the whole war seemed to narrow to the space between a white helmet and a wooden table. The MP said, "You are obstructing military authority." Harker said, "No. I'm standing beside men who broke no law. They're ours." "They're soldiers," Harker said. "That should have been enough for you." The MP looked around and did the arithmetic every uniformed man learns to do. Doors, distance, numbers, temper, witnesses. Then he pointed at Harker. "This will be reported." Harker nodded. "Spell my name right." The MPs left. No one cheered at first. That would have made it too easy. The room stayed still, as if every man inside it had to wait for his own heart to come back down. Then the landlord reached for a glass. "Another round," he said. And the Bell and Lantern remembered how to breathe. Mercer looked at Harker for a long moment. There were speeches that might have fit the size of it. None of them came. So Mercer only said, "You didn't have to do that." Harker sat back down, suddenly aware of the ache in his wrist. "No," he said. "I suppose that's why it mattered." The report arrived 2 mornings later. Not at the pub, not with helmets. This time it came through offices, stamped paper, and a major who had been told to sound controlled. The complaint said British enlisted men had interfered with American military police in the execution of proper orders. It said the incident risked undermining discipline among U.S. forces. It said black troops were beginning to believe they could ignore restrictions if British soldiers were present. And that part, more than anything else, seemed to be what worried them. The British officer who received it was a lieutenant colonel named Edward Markham. He had survived Dunkirk. He had seen roads full of men without rifles and beaches full of smoke. He had little patience for neat paperwork that made ugly things sound administrative. He let the American major finish. Then he asked one question. Had the three men committed an offense under British law? The major said that was not the point. Markham waited. The major said the point was U.S. military regulation. Markham folded his hands on the desk. In a British public house, he said, on British soil, a British landlord may serve whom he chooses, unless British law says otherwise. The major's jaw tightened. Markham continued. Your men may discipline your soldiers, but they may not require my soldiers to assist in removing men who have committed no offense. That is a dangerous precedent. No, Markham said. The dangerous precedent is asking us to pretend there was a charge when there was not. Nothing grand came from it. No proclamation, no press notice, no alliance-shaking scandal. War has a talent for burying moral facts under operational needs. But a message moved anyway, quietly, through barrack rooms, through guard posts, through pubs near camps, through men who had seen the Bell and Lantern empty its chairs without anyone giving an order. Black American soldiers were still subject to the U.S. Army that commanded them. That did not change. The military police still patrolled. That did not change either. But in certain English pubs, in certain rooms, under certain low beams and blackout curtains, the calculation changed. If MPs came to remove black soldiers for no reason except segregation, they might find British soldiers already on their feet, not as policy, as habit, as conscience, as the kind of line men draw before anyone gives it a name. Word reached the American truck companies fast. Important news in an army rarely travels through official channels first. It moves in lorry cabs, in mess lines, in repair sheds, in the half-lit places where men smoke because sleep will not come. By the end of that week, men who had never seen Harker knew the story. Some told it badly. Some made the room bigger. Some gave the MP 5 extra inches and Harker a cleaner insult. But the center stayed true. A British sergeant had stood up. He had asked what the charge was. There had not been one. Mercer wrote home in October. The letter was addressed to his older sister in Jackson, Mississippi. He did not spend many words on the pub. Maybe he did not want to worry her. Maybe he did not trust paper to hold the feeling properly. He wrote that England was cold, the roads were narrow, and some people there looked at him in a way he was not used to. Then he wrote one line that said more than the rest. Some of them call us soldiers first. That was all. But for a man raised under rules designed to make that sentence feel impossible, it was not a small thing. Samuel Tate made it into France and drove fuel near the front until November, when his convoy was hit on a road that was supposed to be quiet. A shell fragment tore through the cab of the truck behind him. He survived. The driver behind him did not. Leonard Brooks returned to Alabama after the war with a limp, 2 campaign ribbons, and a silence around certain memories that his children learned not to press. Elijah Mercer came home too. He came home to a country that had let him wear a uniform overseas and still told him where to sit when he took it off. The United States Army would not be officially desegregated until 1948, 4 years after the pub, 4 years after the convoys. 4 years after men who had carried fuel for liberation came home to a system that still practiced humiliation as routine. So no, the bell and lantern did not change the army. It did not end Jim Crow. It did not give those men what they were owed. A pub cannot repair a nation. A sergeant with a burned wrist cannot undo a command structure. A room full of tired soldiers cannot rewrite the law across an ocean. But that is not the measure of what happened. The measure is smaller and sharper. For a few minutes in September 1944, a system that expected obedience met men who refused to confuse orders with justice. For a few minutes, 3 black American soldiers were not treated as a problem to be moved. They were treated as guests, as comrades, as men with every right to remain in the chair they had already taken. And when authority came through the door wearing white helmets, it found something it had not counted on. Not a riot, not a speech, not a policy. Just a British sergeant placing his pint on the table and asking the one question the regulation could not survive. What's the charge? There wasn't one, and the room knew it. Same war, same table, no charge.